I am happy to be here today to share some of the research that we are doing and that we're really excited about. Let me pull up my slides. So a little bit about this work that we are doing. It is myself and a few of uh, my team members and colleagues that I think are hopefully joining this call today, Jessica Smith and Evan DeYoung. And we have been doing a lot of work around clergy ethics. Now, a lot of clergy are required to take ethics training, and no matter how many trainings clergy are taking, misconduct is still happening. So it made us start wondering, okay, what can we do differently around this? How are we really checking in on somebody's well-being? So we now offer a clergy ethics curriculum that focuses specifically on clergy well-being in hopes that that will help mitigate some of these boundary violations. And we also decided that we did that based on anecdotal information and some misconduct repair work that is happening across the country. But we really wanted to research what are clergy reporting about themselves and what is clergy perception about other people in these boundary violations. So, a little bit about our research. Um, right now, our survey that we are taking has had 170 participants. This has been simply in a little under a year. Each time we are currently deploying our clergy ethics curriculum, we are giving people the opportunity to answer their experiences around misconduct. And also, we are working on disseminating this more places. So when we gave this survey of 170 people that took it, 77 people reported that they have experienced a boundary violation. We left that pretty broad, but that's a lot of people saying that they have experienced some sort of boundary violation. And 22% of them admitted that they have crossed a boundary themselves. The boundary crossings that we most often hear about and talk about usually are about sexual and financial misconduct. And when we polled clergy in this survey, 55% of them say that they have known a victim of sexual misconduct. Now, to help us understand who was filling out this survey, um, most people were most identified as a senior minister. We also had other people that were an associate, retired, extension, some that just classified themselves as other, and a few district superintendents. What you will see is that a lot of people have had 11 or more years of experience, um, which to us lends weight and credibility to the observations on clergy conduct as a whole. So this is what we have learned so far is that 55% of people that responded said that they know a victim of sexual misconduct. And of those people, about half of them said that the perpetrator was a clergy person. Um, that seems to be on par with the way that the anecdotes are running right now. But I think that it's important to be thinking about that half of the times that sexual misconduct is happening by a clergy person. The majority of our respondents so far are United Methodist. They are not all United Methodist, but that is where the survey has been disseminated to the most currently. Um, a little under half of people have known somebody who's committed financial misconduct. And once again, about half of those people, the financial perpetrator was clergy. Um, so these are just important things to know that about half the time it is clergy that are making these misconduct decisions along the way. So then we not only did we want to know perceptions of others, but we wanted to make sure that we were asking people about their own experiences. Have you ever crossed a professional boundary in your role? And 22%, so 38 of the 170 said, yes, I have crossed a professional boundary. Um, while I think that it is helpful to hear about self-reporting, my guess is that while it is anonymous, due to some probably shame or concern, that might be on the low end. But that's almost a quarter of people that have admitted that they have crossed a professional boundary. Um, We also asked, while you're serving in a professional ministry context, have your personal or professional boundaries ever been violated? 77% of people said that they had been. Now, we didn't ask what this meant to them. So this may be sexual boundaries, this may be time boundaries. This could be also harassment, all sorts of things. But 77% of people were saying that their boundaries had been violated. And these are the specific boundaries that they were self-identifying. Now, you could identify more than one boundary, so that's what you will note in here. 70.9% of people said that their time boundaries were violated. That one does not surprise me. Um, clergy may this may be violated by others. They may also respond in all sorts of ways that can sort of violate their own boundaries based on the expectations of that. Relational boundaries. 41% of people said that they have their relational boundaries were violated. Um, again, we don't know exactly what this looks like, but I think that that comes from the confusion of and the murkiness of like, are you friends with congregants? Are you not? Um, what does that look like? And not just romantic relationships. 43% of people reported that there was role confusion, and that's the type of boundaries that have been violated. Some people, about 30% of people said physical space. What I think I find fascinating is that the bottom two, sexual boundaries and financial boundaries, those seem to be the ones emphasized all the time in the church. And while they are still happening, there are lots of other violations that are currently happening for clergy. And so, how do we expand talking about this so that we're not just focusing on sexual boundaries or financial boundaries? Now, we asked people, what do you think is the most common types of misconduct among clergy today? And 68% said burnout related ethical lapses. We left this broad, but people were saying that they were believed that burnout is probably contributing. And because people are exhausted, they're making desperate and quick decisions for relief, and that's when the ethical violations are happening. 65% of people said power abuse and manipulation are most common among clergy today. 61% were saying emotional enmeshment. Again, I think being clergy, you want to walk with people in really challenging times. I also think that it can be really confusing in those moments of murkiness, of invulnerability, of are you trying to fix or save the people that you are serving along the way? Or are you becoming too close of friends with them because you're longing for connection? We were all created to be people in social relationships with one another. And just because we are a pastor doesn't mean that we don't have that longing. 52% of people are believe that confidentiality breaches are happening these days. And then again, even the perception of clergy misconduct. Only 30% of people think that it's sexual misconduct is one of the most common types of misconduct today, and only 20% financial misconduct. And again, at the same time, these are the ones that seem to be talked about the most. So that's why I think that it is the most important to realize that when we hear anecdotes of one things, and that might be when people's credentialing is revoked or in question, but a lot of these other misconduct and boundary lapses are happening along the way. So Kashmiri, I will throw it back over to you.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Lindsay. So now we're going to go back into some breakout rooms. And as we prepare to go out into these rooms, I invite you all just to consider this following question to guide your discussion. And the question is, what factors in ministry culture do you believe are driving these boundary violations? Again, what factors in ministry culture do you believe are driving these boundary violations? So now we'll have a few minutes to go into breakout rooms and we'll be back together very soon.
So, in the first little bit, we talked about what are the boundary violations that are happening, both perception and then self-reported, and self-reported of what people crossed over and then what they felt like they were violated against. Now we're going to go into a perception and some self-report around contributing factors to this misconduct. When we asked, what do you believe are the top contributing factors to clergy misconduct? Um, we gave a longer list and then we let it be open-ended as well. These are just the top ones that people chose. Um, as you can see, poor mental and emotional health was the one that was the highest, but it is not far from burnout and isolation and loneliness. So it seems like what is contributing to clergy violating boundaries is a lot of exhaustion, a lot of disconnection socially from other people, and poor emotional or mental health. So maybe some depression symptoms, anxious symptoms, anything that people are not addressing in healthy ways. Um, it is interesting that the lower percentage is lack of accountability. That some people think that because people aren't going to be caught, then there is lower accountability in all of that. Um, I find it fascinating that training has nothing to do with it in some ways. People don't believe that there's a small percentage that thinks that if they were trained better, then they wouldn't violate the boundaries. But that does not seem to be a majority of people thinking that. That we just need to send people to more and more of the same training and say, thou shalt not do these things, which is what we've notoriously done in the past regarding ethics and clergy misconduct. And very few people, but a few people listed substance use as an influencing factor. So then we started asking people about their self-report when they have crossed a professional boundary. Again, this percentage was 22% of people. It's probably slightly lower than in reality, but was reported. But when we asked these 38 respondents what contributed to them crossing and violating this boundary, a lot of people said vulnerability, like they were in vulnerable spaces with people, or maybe they themselves felt really vulnerable. This can take on lots of different forms, so it's kind of a broad answer, but it's helpful for us to think about how often are clergy feeling vulnerable and then feeling like they might need to do something about it. Burnout, once again, was incredibly high, and loneliness was pretty high. Mental health, and again, a few more people cited poor training for their own violations and lack of accountability. But once again, burnout, loneliness, and mental health were near the top. So the consistent thread throughout this is burnout and loneliness seem to be the top contributing factors in both perception and people's lived experiences. And so Again, it's both what they perceive and their reporting from their own personal experience. So 39.5% of people identified burnout as one of the contributing factors to their own ethical violations. But 62% of people identified burnout as a top contributing factor to all clergy misconduct. If this is one of the leading things, the question is, what are we doing about this? Um, Again, loneliness and isolation has been named towards the top. 34.2% of people identified isolation and loneliness as one of the contributing factors to their own ethical violations. But 62.4% identified it as a top contributing factor to all clergy misconduct. Again, the data tells a consistent story that clergy are not just observing burnout and isolation as risk factors, but they are living them. So these are, if we, these are the top themes, then this is kind of some of my takeaways right now. That boundary violations are pervasive, that 71% of people experienced a boundary violation personally. Boundary violations are happening. Um, some of the key violations that are happening against clergy is time and relational boundaries, saying that it's systemic issues. But burnout is a clear critical risk factor. Um, so, what are we doing about burnout? And again, isolation compounds the risk. It ranked high in the contributing factors and appeared consistently in self-reported cases. So, if we're all, as clergy, getting appointed to new places, serving in rural places, continually leaving communities that we have gotten to know, and then going to a new place to pastor, um, there we are already at a heightened chance of isolation and loneliness. And if we know that that really compounds the potential risk of boundary violations, what are we doing to mitigate this? Again, lower down, training gaps do persist. Um, there probably is more and more things that we can do to consistently try to keep training up to date. I think that it's probably a disconnection of, is everything being taught, or is everything being heard? Um, we are unsure, and it differs across denominations. Um, and the last thing is that clergy know more than they're reporting. Um, so if about half of clergy know a victim of sexual misconduct and about half the perpetrators are clergy, um, we just really wonder about underreporting, or like, are we doing anything to care for our colleagues by reporting it along the way? Um, so these are some of the insights by thinking about all of those contributing factors. I will send it back to y'all.
Okay, well, thank you again so much, Lindsay. So now we'll have a time for Q&A. So my colleague Phil and I will help to moderate this time. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to just put these in the chat, or you can use your raise the hand feature as well. So Phil and I will just, yeah, lead with some questions. So Phil, would you like to start, or I'm happy to, whatever. And you're on mute.
Do you have one, Kashmir, you'd like to start with?
You go ahead. I feel like I've been talking a lot on
Okay.
this. So
Well, I think I'm gonna in the chat. Dave Hagel asked a good question about are there differences between Roman Catholic and Protestant issues on here. Dave can jump in, and if you'd like to restate it.
No, I was just wondering, something I've really thought about, wondered about, I guess, for a long time. Seems like in a lot of the circles that I've traveled in, uh, I just wonder about confidentiality. I don't know how it's emphasized amongst the clergy that I've circulated with over the years, and I wondered how confidentiality differs between Protestants. Say, Roman Catholic priests seem to have a real I mean, they're known for that, right? Like they go to the confessional. It's like, and even that between clergy and lawyers, for instance, or the medical doctors. I was just curious to know. I would be curious to know if there's any kind of differences in terms of breaches of confidentiality amongst the evangelicals, Roman Catholics, mainline. I mean, just something I've wondered about over the years. It seems like our circles, my more evangelical circles, tend to be very casual, or sharing with spouses, very common, you know, and something I'm aware of and try not to do. So just curious to know if you've thought about that or have any thoughts.
I just really value thinking about that now. I had not thought too much about it. Um, I think part of these questions is I recognize that some of this is left open for interpretation. Um, but since we're asking lots about self-perception, um, we thought that it would be helpful to leave some of it open for your own interpretation of how you might report or regard others. But now I'm going to be really thinking about denominational differences in some of that. So thanks, Dave.
I think Peter has his hand raised. Peter, you want to speak to that?
Sure, yeah, just I'm a lay Catholic, but I've spent the last 16 years forming in formation programs forming Catholic priests. So I could just say that it's not anything that I assessed in any survey, but just by observation. My sense, Dave, is that perhaps what Catholic priests might experience is the other side of the pendulum, where I think you're right. There's a sense that confidentiality is so heightened that there's almost a level of lack of sharing when there is an urgent need or something that needs to be shared. And we could look to our most recent history in the Catholic Church in the United States and worldwide to see the implications of that in some ways, the secrecy and transparency. And I thought I saw accountability being one of them raised in there. I don't know what the proportion of different traditions were within the study, but that in my own mind was a thinking of one of the challenges culturally, certainly within the Catholic Church, has been structures where there's openness and ability to accountability to the broader community, for sure. Hope that's helpful. And then I do actually have a question of my own, but I think there might be a queue as well. So I'm happy to step back into my queue and wait for my turn for that.
Oh, that's okay. You go ahead and then we'll move
You have
on
the
to
floor,
another
Peter. Go
question.
ahead.
Okay, super. I am, I guess I've been ruminating about the idea of boundaries as we describe them professionally, and society has become so professional that almost our natural healthy commitments to just relationships in general. Um, I wonder if we wind up thinking about the boundaries in that, oh, if I'm a minister, I the professional boundary is here, but in reality, relationships are going to be um, we all have these healthy boundary relationships regardless, especially in communities. I think back to our early church, and there was no professional ministers, but everyone needed to hold each other accountable. Um, and that sometimes professional ministers, we might say, well, what's the professional boundary? When in reality, it's just a healthy boundary overall. Um, and maybe dismantling professional, but talking about power differentials, I think that probably is the key to establishing a different perspective on what that boundary needs to be, where if I act or don't act because of the level of influence that I have on other people, that's what matters versus I have a, um, it's my professional responsibility to. It's all of our responsibility. So just curious about that. I hope I made some sense in the setup of the question.
Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think of like a way to quick summarize that. Kashmiri or Phil, do you have like a quick summary sentence of the end of that?
We should go back to Peter. If he could.
Yeah. The
I was listening
uh
to the whole thing, but my brain was spinning.
Yeah.
yeah,
So just
is it I guess I'm just wondering like is it just the fact that we all need healthy boundaries no
mhm,
matter what the relationship and the distinction between the minister as a professional versus the fact that they have power over others gives them a different responsibility. Um,
mhm.
and that's how we can think about it. So that when I'm no longer being short in my summary, uh, but
I
is
think,
that what we're looking at here? Is that a sense of what you're saying in this research?
well, I think that we can all just be healthy human beings and have good personal boundaries with each other. Um, I think that for so long, ministry didn't have a lot of personal boundaries, perhaps, but professional boundaries of that people were kind of on call all the time. Um, and so that's that can be a personal boundary of like how much access do you allow to yourself. But I start thinking about that somewhat as shifting into talking about professional boundaries. But I guess personal and professional boundaries are somewhat open to interpretation. I think a lot of it has to do with expectations around that, like what's expected of the professional, um, then to know what ties into healthy boundaries around that.
Lindsay, I think there are a couple, again, working with that and the issue of time.
Hmm.
Um, one, speak more to from Karen, since time boundaries were the highest, could you speak more to what that looks like and what might be done to improve? And then Thad followed up on that about our focus is often on, again, what's going to get adjudicatory into legal trouble.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that's sexual boundaries usually. But if perhaps time is the breaking the time boundary is really the more crucial issue, or at least not, what I'm trying to say is
Hmm.
the more
Yeah.
foundational issue, and yet it often goes unaddressed. And so
Yeah. So time boundaries. One of the anecdotal things that I have heard a lot of is talking about time off. So you have some clergy that say you should work 6 days a week and have one day off, and that one day should be your Sabbath day. So you work 6 days and then you have a Sabbath day. Um, in reality, you should be working 5 days, have a Sabbath day and a day off. Um, that's a time boundary that we're not really talking about, but I think is really at the root of some of this. Uh, if we're working 6 days and only have a Sabbath day, when are we supposed to run all our errands, go to our doctor's appointments, do our laundry, like go to the grocery store, take care of those things? Um, I think that had been an older mentality of you work 6 days and you have a day off that is Sabbath. What I have found anecdotally is that part of what contributed to that thought pattern was lots of clergy that were married, and so their spouse was handling everything else in the house, and so they were able to just work 6 days and then have a Sabbath day. Um, that would be lovely and amazing. And that's also not the reality of most people. But you have churches that are still having this expectation, and then they're upset when people aren't Sabbathing, but they're like, I had to go to the dentist, and I have to go do my laundry, and I have to go grocery shopping, and I can't really reconnect with God. I mean, maybe in the grocery aisle, but most of the time we're thinking about 10 million other things. Um, so I think that's where the time boundaries, both the expectation of what clergy should be doing with their time, of how much they should be working, and the reality of it is a little different. I also think access to the clergy person of like, should you be available 24/7? That had been the previous mentality, is that you should respond to all crises. What I will say is that if clergy are responding to all crises or perceived crises, they're also not really setting up parishioners well to triage their own crises, because then everybody thinks that they just have a crisis or have access to the pastor all the time without doing their own work. I have found that in my own counseling practice that years ago I was like, okay, I'm going to go on vacation, but in case something happens, like I'll still check my email a couple times. I ended up enabling a number of counseling clients that then anytime something happened, they would email me. I finally, after a few years, put my foot down and said, like, I am actually going away. Here is the mental health crisis numbers. Like, this is what you have access to. And they would email me the night before I came back or the night I came back and said, okay, this thing happened. Here's the tools that I used that you taught me. What a concept. And now I'd like to have a session this week to process it. So I also wonder if sometimes as clergy, we think of boundaries as bad things, um, and they will make people uncomfortable at times. But if we hold firm some of those, then we are also setting other people up well. Um, so just something to be thinking about in time. Thinking about Thad's comment, I do think that we talk about the big showy stuff like, sexual misconduct or financial misconduct because there's some legal implications behind that. I do think the smaller ones or more socially acceptable boundary violations like time violations, or just even relational violations like friendships, um, are the ones that become that slippery slope that we're not really talking about. Um, if you aren't resting, then you're also running on fumes and a little more burned out. If you are lonely, you're probably going to seek out more friendships or break confidentiality in your own church with people that you consider your close friends because you need a space to be able to talk about those things. So I think those are the ones that are people don't always name as boundary violations because they see them as socially acceptable and kind of what comes with the profession. But those are the ones that really start that snowball of going towards the other violations. If you're becoming friends with your congregant and you are feeling lonely, then there's a greater likelihood that eventually it's going to lead to possibility of sexual misconduct. Um, so I think some of these smaller ones we say are not that big a deal. And maybe, in a vacuum, it's not that big a deal, but in larger scale, it really can impact other things.
Yes. And I noticed that there's some questions from Paul here that are specific to the survey. Um, whether there was a specific definition of boundary violation that was provided to participants and whether the survey is still open.
We did not put a specific definition in the survey. Most of the people that had taken the survey have taken our clergy ethics course that we have written, which talks about the definition on the front end. But it now makes me think that as we've started expanding the survey elsewhere, giving one key definition at the top would probably be helpful in this survey. So far, it is a majority, if not all, United Methodists that have taken this survey. But part of why we wanted to have this conversation and share this initial research today is that we really want to start expanding this work outside of the United Methodist Church. We just had tied it to our clergy ethics curriculum so far as we started dabbling and asking these questions to move beyond the anecdotal of just hearing it through the grapevine of people telling us about this and really seeing the tangible numbers of it all. So I think that we can probably easily drop that in the chat. Thanks, Thad. Um, so feel free to take the survey, send it to other people. If you have questions, send me a note. And I would be happy to talk more about it, about how we might disseminate it to your larger network.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. And I see that we're
Looks, I'm
actually
sorry.
at time. So I know Thad has just a couple of comments before we wrap up our time together.
Absolutely. And Kyle, I see your hand. I know that Lindsay does not have a hard stop. So let me just make one comment and you all can continue to chat. I wanted to make sure that you're aware of our next virtual gathering, which will be on May the 19th. I'm really excited about this one, guys. Really excited about this one. It's going to be about trauma and holistic transformation. We got a scholar from the Claremont School of Theology that has done a lot of work on trauma. And he's going to be coming to talk more about that. In addition, though, and this is the unique, so you get a 2 for 1. All right. So you not only are going to have an opportunity to come and hear some of the latest kind of thought theologically about trauma and holistic transformation, but also Vanessa Lovelace, who is the executive director of the Louisville Institute, which is a Lilly Endowment funded organization, will be coming to talk about grant opportunities. So the scholar that's coming is received funding from the Louisville Institute to do some work. The Louisville Institute has both opportunities for folks that are in the pastoral side to be funded, as well as those that are academically associated to be funded for projects. So I hope you'll come not only to learn about holistic trauma transformation, but also Vanessa Lovelet's going to be describing the new ways that they're going to be issuing grants. And my hope is that we can get a lot of those funds channeled towards those that are here on the call and within the Common Tables larger network. So anyway, something to think about. Hope you'll sign up. You'll find more information at the upcoming gatherings page. And Kyle, I saw your hand, so you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Dad. Hi, Lindsay. Quick question as you were talking about the just the relationships and friendships that you have with people within your congregation. How do you take practical steps to still develop friendships um, without crossing boundaries? And not even
Mhm.
like I'm not talking about, like you were saying, kind of like sexual boundaries or anything like that, but more just like the not even confidentiality, just like you have this power
Mhm.
dynamic. They see you as your pastor, but they also see you as a friend, and you see him as a friend, but you also see him as a congregate. And like, how do you practically navigate the duality in those relationships without boundaries kind of being blown out of the water?
Yeah. I think what's really hard is that we will have lots of dual relationships in our lives because life is messy and we are human. And we can't just live in one little box. I think a lot of it is about how mindful we are about it all. Like if somebody is our friend, are we showing them favoritism and at Wednesday night supper sitting next to them all the time? Um, are we, it's not even confidentiality. Like, are we processing things about the church with them? Are
Mm.
we sharing information about the church earlier? Are we creating exceptions for them along the way? And so much of this is like we're not consciously doing these things. Um, but I think anytime I'm not the person to stand up and say you cannot have any friends ever again. Um, it is really hard when we're in this dual relationship when some of your closest friends are in your congregation. Yes, it is more work to make friends outside of your congregation. It also is really healthy to have those other spaces. So I'm not saying like we're not ever going to be friends inside our congregations, but how can we be really mindful about making sure that we are treating everybody the same, um, without spending more time towards these people that are friends or only going to their Sunday school Christmas party or things like that.
Yeah. So the intentionality, mindfulness that you have as the pastor, the clergy member, and then
Hmm.
a follow up to that would be, um, I'm a pastor at my church, but also an elder. But then I'm also a part of the elder board, and so I report to six other elders at our church who are my bosses, but then also friends with them in some way, shapes, or
Hmm.
form, and we've connected over the years. So how do you practically when it comes to church governance, how do you practically um, navigate the dual relationships there? Because in that sense, there is a lot of confidential stuff that is
Hmm.
actively talked about on a consistent basis.
And I think that's where the power dynamics get a little are important to be thinking about. Maybe it's slightly more equal power, of you as the pastor and the elder board, um, than you as the pastor and any congregant.
Hmm.
Um, so I think all of this, when it comes to boundaries, is how mindful are we about our choices versus how much is our own needs just driving this all. And we're just focused on meeting our needs without being aware of like what are we using as outlets to meet our needs.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I wish I had like an exact like here is the formula to do this.
Yeah.
Um, that would be amazing.
It,
Uh,
it it would be. Yeah. No, and I feel like I'm out on the learning side of already being burned by this a couple of years ago, and
mhm,
so like trying to like reestablish friendships and there's a sense of like my wife and I don't we are we are very apprehensive to want to open up to people now, very apprehensive
mhm,
of wanting to talk to people, and yet we've kind of have been put into this role in senior leadership for the last several years, and part of that is because of the authenticity that we lead with, and so now the
mhm.
authenticity has kind of kicked us in the butt, and now yet
Yeah,
like so we don't want to do it anymore, but yet at the same time like there's a sense of like, well, you kind of have to, and so what does that look like specifically? So yeah, when you get through all your survey results and then you find those specific steps, then you can let us know. So but other than that, I think that
perfect.
the mindfulness I think is a very I think
Hmm.
we're already there, but because of bad experiences, but I think that's a helpful approach, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Kyle and everyone else, just there's in the chat a couple of resources. Charlie mentioned one, and I popped the Amazon link to that book. There's also Victoria White's work on holy friendships. And so I'll put that in the link, or put that link to the book in the chat as well. So a couple of those are very useful. And Charlie, if you're able to pop into the chat, I know Paul had a question about the audit, but I think Kashmiri, I think you got one more question before we conclude.
Yeah, I see that Michelle in the chat said, is this clergy ethics course available to those outside of the UMC?
We would be happy to talk to you about that. We have two different models for our course. We currently do a flipped classroom model, where there is an online course that people can take. And then I come in person to do the supplemental and scenario work where we talk about all of this gray stuff. Online, we give the few parameters of like, these are the things, yes and no. Here's where we have to start asking more questions. And in person, we get to ask all those questions and do it that way. Um, we do also have a boundary basics course. Oh, there. Evan just dropped in the chat, of if you just go to lindsaygeist.com and send us a note. Um, Evan and Jessica are both on here. I've worked with them. We're a great team together, to be able to talk about these courses and how we might bring it to you. But it's really intertwined with these survey results and being taught in a different way, that we're focusing on individual well-being to reduce boundary violations and really learn about ethical decision making.
Great. Okay, fantastic. And here, I know I keep pushing things, but Jeremy Thomas, I know you have your hand up. You can have the last word, my friend.
Uh, Hi. So just thank you for all the sharing, but just one thing in another perspective, I would like to ask you concerning boundaries about relationships. How about when people are not elders or pastors, but they are mature enough, and when they come to pastors or leaders and they say, "Can I just have some friendly time with you?" Like just go for a walk or do like I would just like to just go and walk with your dog or whatever when you like to do those things. And I just want to spend friendly time with you. And then they have some issues doing that. When pastors or leaders have some issues because, oh, okay, but you're in my church, so can I be your friend? I'm not sure because I need to be your pastor. And this is my reflection, my question to you, because there was one thing I'm doing a master's in marriage and family counseling, and I remember something which really struck me. That one, when we started in my class, there were many pastors also, and the lecturer said, "Okay, so who are pastors here?" Half left lift their hands, and she asked them, "Can I ask you to be pastors and be fathers for your community?" And and if people need counseling or professional therapy, send them to your friends here so that you stay there further.
Mhm.
And I would like to ask, like in this dynamic of relationship, of family relationship, of just when people who are not leaders or elders want to be friends, what is the best practice for non-leaders to be friends to those leaders?
Mhm. I think like so many helping professions, there's also perception. Like in my counseling practice, several of my clients I've seen for a while, and they will openly say, and we kind of laugh about it. They're like, I call you my friend, and I refer to you as my friend to other people. I recognize we're not friends because I know nothing about you. Um, but you know everything about me. But sometimes we refer to that friendship of like, this feels like a comfortable, safe space. Um, so I think what's challenging is when people want to spend friendly time with you, do they perceive you as a friend? Um, Perhaps. Do you perceive them as a friend? You get to decide some of that based on your sharing level and emotional intimacy and any of that. Um, I also recommend that if they're going to come to you about the same topic 2 to 3 times, send them to a therapist. I think that's the difference between friends and being somebody's pastor, is that a friend will love to rehash the same thing over and over and over. Um, and because you love your friend, you let them do that. If you are their pastor, uh, you know that they need additional tools and make sure that they go see a therapist. So I think that's some of the also the boundaries to put in place that as a friend, if somebody comes to you about a relational issue, you're also most often going to cheer for them. Um, if you are their pastor or their therapist or something else, you might have to say hard things. Um, and I think that's also a boundary that can help identify the difference of what your role is in those moments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great question, Jeremy. All right. So in the chat, you'll find that upcoming gatherings page. And so I would invite you to take a look before you leave and register for that next gathering on May the 19th, where we'll be talking about trauma and also grant opportunities. It'd be a great way to go into the summer. So great to see you all today.